Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by Pielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Today is Friday, the 18th day of May 2018. Lots of stuff going on in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. Of course, we hear about another terrifying incident involving a shooting in Texas. Obviously, hearts and prayers go out to the victims and everybody involved in Texas over another horrific and sad situation. And all I could say to the people is just continue to keep your heads up. And every time there is something like this, I always want to throw the message out there because, we never know individually when we are close, or perhaps we may be close enough to a given situation like this. And, it's just a matter of how we treat people, how we respect people, offer assistance, offer, ways to help those. And it doesn't, somebody that ends up getting a gun and shooting a bunch of people, it's not always that person that you always thought could be. Sometimes it's just a bad series of events. And I always feel that if there's that one more conversation, that one more person that was close enough to them that showed that they cared, we could avoid something horrific like this. And, the more this happens, the more fear I think we all, as human nature, it's just natural to be scared. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that we are in situations like this. So obviously prayers go out to the victims and everybody involved. And please, everybody, if it's one person to a million people, no matter how many people it is that I come in contact with, I just want to offer myself being there. And if we could start just a little circle amongst a couple people that, can hear me and say, hey, I'm going to be that kind of person and be there for everybody around me, whether I know them or I don't know them. All it takes is a couple minutes, and hopefully one, positive conversation can impact the lives of many. And obviously, the many innocent people that, have nothing to do with anything bad that's going on in somebody else's life. But once again, this is the Passball Show. Feel free to comment if you'd like on the Facebook Live or Periscope feed. Of course, the videos will be available on demand on YouTube. So anybody's got anything to say, please bring it up. Series of topics I'm going to get into today, as today is the last show before the weekend. And obviously you got the horse race coming up with the Preakness. Obviously a lot of people are going to be rooting for the winner of the Kentucky Derby, which is pretty much the way it goes. So that's a fun event. And obviously if you have the same horse that ends up winning both the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, you have the Belmont Stakes in a couple weeks, which ends up becoming a pretty big deal. So, we're going to start off today. And obviously if you're in New Jersey or, obviously have a pulse over the last week, you'll see a lot of legislation going to the Supreme Court and the decision that was made, which garners the state's rights to be able to have gambling or have, sports betting legalized in each individual state, and having it be a decision up to the state as far as opposed to being a federal thing. And, you're hearing so many different pros and cons involved in it. And, there's good reasons to be against it. I do believe that there's some fear that has to be out there if, gambling gets in the wrong person's hands. And, somebody with an addictive personality, would probably be wise to stay away from gambling. And listen, anything done in moderation, whether it's, alcohol or any sort of recreational activity, is okay up to a certain point. And anybody that does anything, even if it's a little bit devious, if it's up to a certain point and is done in moderation, we don't see many problems in a lot of instances. But if something gets in the hands of somebody that may be doing it a little too much, and I always compare gambling to alcoholism, because, I could go out there and I could have myself an adult beverage, and it's not going to impact me the way that I've seen it impact so many other people's lives in a negative way. And it doesn't mean that it's okay for me to drink and not okay for somebody else, that has a problem to drink. But I think it's very, important for somebody to be cognizant of their own, ways of going and the way they can handle different things and the results of what happens if somebody were to drink too much. And I think the same has to apply to the world of gambling, because if somebody goes and throws a couple dollars in a slot machine and maybe win a couple bucks one day, and the next time they go do it in a couple weeks they'll lose a couple dollars, nobody sees any problem with that. But if somebody goes there and spends hundreds of dollars, may chip in and end up going into their bank accounts, and may end up using money that they have put aside to pay certain bills, whether it's rent or a mortgage, or starts taking money out that's supposed to be allocated for other things, and all of a sudden goes broke, then you see how it can become a problem. And the basketball player formerly known as Ron Artest, he calls himself Meta World Peace now, made a statement out saying that when he was at St. John's, he was offered a certain amount of money, a substantial amount of money, I believe $30,000 or so, to help throw a game. And it makes you think. And Ron Artest in that situation did not, chose to not do it. But if he's being offered money, it doesn't, certainly means that other players were probably being offered money to throw games. And the one issue that I have in regards to gambling, is always, the gamblers themselves. And if you go out to Las Vegas, anybody that's been out there, you realize that there's people that make a good living gambling. And they are professional gamblers. They do very well. They've played odds. Some of them may be mathematicians, but others just, have been in the business so long that they understand, the pros and cons of it, and are able to, use things to their own advantage, and are able to make good money for themselves. But then there's also gamblers that are on the other side and are kind of doing it in a devious and crooked type of way. And the fear that I have is out for a lot of different kids. And kids, as they get into athletics, maybe even down as little as the high school level, could be influenced by gamblers. And this is a problem that I don't think is made any worse by the fact that, most states, and probably in the near future, just about every state, is going to have legalized sports betting. But, the fact that, money can really be the root of all evils, and it can be the root of all evils in so many different ways. And you have kids, and I use kids as a certain way to describe the natural maturation process of an adult. You go from a certain stage where you don't have a lot of money, you rely a lot on your parents, and whether you have good parents or bad parents or parents that aren't there, maybe you grow up in a single parent household, and maybe money is a little hard to come by. So athletics provide a different avenue and a different venue for somebody to perhaps do something for their family. Maybe you're amongst a group of siblings, and you have a single mother, or in some cases a single father, and they're doing everything they can, but they're just not making ends meet. And you find that maybe you have some talent. You could play basketball, or you could play football, and you get yourself a college scholarship. And as you go through the process, obviously the goal is to become professional. You become a professional, you get that standard salary, and all of a sudden you get to repay your parents and your siblings for everything that they've done for you when you were young and when you guys were all struggling. Now, gamblers have the opportunity to get to athletes before they become professionals. And the thought, going back to what happened with the Fab Five, and the amount of money that Chris Webber and those guys ended up being given by boosters and people that were considered friends of the school and stuff like that. It's hard to keep a kid away from that, especially based off of somebody's upbringing. If somebody has not seen a lot of money and have seen all the evils that exist for growing up in poverty, they're going to be influenced by somebody that may or may not have their best interest in mind. If somebody's able to throw you $30,000 when you've never seen, that large of a sum of money in your lifetime, and all of a sudden, things start coming to your head. Say, hey, what can I do with that money? I'd love to pay my mom back. I'd love to have her, make sure her bills are taken care of, make sure her living situation's all right. And it's perfectly natural to feel that way. But, once again, you got college athletics as they stand right now. They, college, schools and the NCAA, they profit. They make so much money off of these kids. There's selling of jerseys. And I keep thinking of that number 4 Chris Webber jersey when he was at the University of Michigan, being the top selling jersey in the entire country. I mean, that almost makes me sick. The fact that he was unable to, because he was an amateur athlete, ineligible to receive any sort of, gratuity or anything because of the sale of his jersey. Kids and, young men and young women are buying a jersey at such a ridiculous rate. And this guy is not entitled to any bit of money off of that. The millions and millions of dollars that are made off his jersey sales. It still makes me sick to this day, being so many years later. So I think of college athletes, and I think that they are, in some cases, very vulnerable. And I do fear, I don't think this is something that you could see happening in all, big-name colleges. These kids, up to a certain point, are pretty well taken care of, but some of them aren't. So what is it about their experience and the way that they are treated in college as amateur athletes that would keep them from taking money from a gambler, whether it's a legal gambler or not? So once again, it's not a matter of states' rights. It's not a matter of whether sports betting is legalized in each individual state. These are all issues that, athletes have to worry about. And, that gambler that's going to come to you and offer you a certain sum, that sum, may be different for different athletes. $30,000 may not have been enough for Ron Artest. But what about $50,000? What about $100,000? What if that gambler was willing to write him a check for $1 million to throw a game? And I don't know. I mean, individually, was Ron Artest, could he have been bought? I don't know. But there's plenty of athletes that will have that potential and will have that vulnerability to be bought in certain situations like that. And that's what I fear. And I don't know if it's something that down the road, we could go years upon years and have this and nothing happens and all of a sudden we'll have a big story. And that big story comes up and all of a sudden we'll draw attention to it. Similar and obviously in no relationship in any way, shape, or form to, gun violence and shootings. But once again, there was a shooting. So a lot of attention is going to be brought to it, whether we talk about, well-being of people or gun rights and stuff like that. The conversation needs to be had now. And I don't know, how we keep, athletes at the amateur status and at the amateur rate from, being, that vulnerable enough to be able to take that kind of money. And another group of players, which I've always said this and I've spoken about a lot on the show, are minor league baseball players. Minor league baseball players are making such a low, salary. It's very hard for them to live. They go through the struggles. And listen, you could say, hey, if you're good enough at some point, you'll make it to the major leagues and it'll be you'll receive the reward of all your hard work. But for those players that spend some time in the minor leagues, maybe those late bloomers, we've seen it so many times that there's players that spent, 4 or 5, in some cases 6 years in the minor leagues. They take a little time to develop and hone their skills and then come up to the major leagues and become very productive. Well, if in year 3, living is a struggle. If year 4, living is a bigger struggle. By the time you get to year 5, you're sitting there with, your wife and your kids trying to figure out what your future is going to be. If it's not going to happen in year 5, can you, toughen it out to get to year 6? And if for some reason you don't make the major leagues in year number 6, can you man up and toughen it out and put those struggles upon your family for another year? Gamblers prey on stuff like that. And for the most part, it's been illegal gamblers. Now, obviously, you're going to have people in the illegal gambling ring, those quote-unquote bookies. And I've said all along, I deal with a bookie. I deal with a very respectable bookie. And you know what? If he's listening now, he'll laugh when I say this. He's a nice guy for a bookie. But there's good people in all areas. There's bad people in all areas. The bottom line is the legalization of sports betting. I don't know if it necessarily helps or hurts the situation, but I think it does bring it to the forefront. Bringing things to the forefront, what obviously does, it allows us to talk about it. And it brings it up as topics, not just on this show, but certainly many other shows out there that are discussing, the pros and cons of sports gambling as they exist in a free state. I live in New Jersey. Bets should be taken probably in Monmouth Park around Memorial Day. So it looks like this is something that's going to happen pretty quickly. So, I just fear that for the athletes, for the amateur athletes, and obviously in baseball for the professional athletes that are in, a tough situation. Now, obviously the difference between college athletics and the pros is, minor league baseball players are, not going to be offered money to throw a game. But you could see organized gamblers, whether they're legal or illegal, get involved with players and say, hey, I could throw you some money if you involve, with what I'm doing in college basketball or college football. So there's ways that I believe the gambler, good or bad, good intentioned or bad intention, could get to the, to the vulnerable person. And obviously the vulnerable person is usually anybody without a lot of money or anybody that is living in a poverty type of situation or just in a situation where they're just not generating enough income to be able to pay their own bills. So it's something that I do think about. And, Meta World Peace, listen, he every now and then will throw a different comment here and there. But in this case, it kind of does make me think that a college basketball player or a college football player, and obviously it'd be a lot harder to do in college football. If there was a certain line on a game, you'd have to get a lot more players involved to be able to throw a college football game. In college basketball, you could certainly shave points. One person has been proven in the history of college basketball to be able to shave points and to be able to determine the point spread, whether a team wins by a certain amount or not. And for those of you who don't know what point shaving is, a line for a college basketball game could be set up. Let's say Syracuse is playing St. John's, and Syracuse is favored by 13 points. And they're blowing out St. John's. They're up by, 17 or 18 points. As the last couple minutes of the game goes, there could be one player on Syracuse. And I'm using, obviously, random school names. I have no information about Syracuse point shaving. So, they could decide, all right, hey, maybe I'll make a bad pass here and there. I'll let St. John's make a couple baskets. It doesn't hurt Syracuse in the end because they still win the basketball game. But the people that bet on the line, whether Syracuse was going to win by more than 13 points or less than 13 points, if the game is less than 13 points, then the people that put the money on, for the under will end up coming out on top. Perhaps there's a lot more money involved for those if Syracuse doesn't cover the spread. So point shaving is something that existed in college basketball for years. So I look at it and I do feel for the athletes because I feel we have to come to a certain point where there's got to be some sort of compensation or at least at the very least like a stipend or something like that to where they are rewarded for the fact that they are athletes and they're on a national program that millions and millions of people follow and the stadiums that they play in are filled every single night. There are people that are contributing so much money, not just to the school, but to that particular athletic program. And they're doing it because of the kids. The performance of the kids on the basketball court are leading to the amount of revenue that the school is bringing in. And because of that, it's not necessarily fair to say, all right, they're just amateur athletes. They shouldn't be entitled to anything. Now, I don't think we should do anything to a point where they're getting paid to play college basketball. I think that might be a little far, but there has to be something between them being paid to play college basketball and then being in a situation where they are right now, where the schools are ridiculously profiting and exploiting, what they are doing on the basketball court. And in some cases in college football, what the college football players are doing on the field. And I don't think that's right. So I do think that there should be some sort of happy medium where the players should receive something. Maybe some sort of bonus. maybe to make sure that they have a little more extra spending money. Not as employees, not to be paid a salary, but to have something thrown their way based off of the revenue that's being generated by their individual college basketball and college football programs. Now, obviously, if you say, hey, you can only apply to college basketball and college football, that's where we talk about paying college athletes, because other sports don't generate the same revenue that college basketball and college football do. So I think it's a very interesting situation, because there's ways to get around it. Ways to say, hey, these athletes aren't necessarily being compensated, but they're being rewarded for the role that they play in the revenue that their particular school that they go to is being generated. Because without them, without their performance, without them being on a college basketball court or the college football field, that school will not be able to generate the amount of extra money that they are. So because of that, there should be something that should trickle down to reward those players. And when I say those players, I mean every player that wears a uniform. Every basketball player that's on that team. Now, it might not be fair, because, the one or two stars that may be there for a while or may not be there for a while are the ones that are most responsible for generating all this revenue. But they should all be rewarded for the revenue that they're bringing to the school. And I'll tell you, this thing with jersey sales drives me crazy, because I understand they're not going to ever put the player's name on the back of the jersey. And that's probably the way the school gets away with saying, hey, I'm selling that number 4 jersey. Everybody and their mother knows that number 4 Michigan jersey was Chris Webber's. But they're not going to put Webber's last name on the back of the jersey because he's an amateur athlete. But Chris Webber's impact on the University of Michigan and that whole Fab Five and what they did over those couple of years made that school millions upon millions of dollars. And if it wasn't for the Fab Five, and if it wasn't for what they accomplished over those couple seasons that they were there and together, that school would not have generated anywhere near the amount of money that they did. And the school received a lot of money in regards to the jersey sales that were made there. And that's my biggest point, and it's one of the things that I'm always going to go back to when I talk about how unfair it is for that college athlete. Now, listen, if a college athlete is that good, you say, hey, they're going to become pros, and when they become pros, they're going to be all right. But how does it apply to baseball? And I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but, that top draft pick in baseball still's got a chance. He may never make it to the major leagues. He could get injured. He's going to get that bonus that he signs right out of college, but all of a sudden he goes into the minor leagues, and once that bonus is spent, he's going to have to go through the minor leagues just like anybody else, just like that guy that was drafted in the 35th round, just like that guy that was undrafted, just like that free agent that came in there that played college at a small school. They have it tough up until they get to the major leagues. Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Glad to be with you. Of course, today is the 18th day of May 2018. We'll be back with you next Monday, probably from 6 to 7. We'll see how things go. I do thank everybody for tuning into the show that I did yesterday morning. That was kind of fun. Get up at 7 and just wake up and think about everything that's on your mind. And I was glad about a lot of people that interacted with me. So it's an idea that I think we're going to consider going forward. Maybe do a couple more shows earlier in the morning, just to appeal to that crowd, because it seemed like there were some people that were interested. A couple more things I want to get into. You got the situation going on with the New York Mets. This is a team that's free-falling. And I said, last week when I did a show that I wasn't going to spend that much time talking about the New York Mets. But one of the things that stands out to me is, man, it just, you hear certain news about certain players getting hurt as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show. Once again, John Pielli here with you. Program's brought to you by johnpielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. And it almost seems like with the Mets that there is a certain script that is set to be played each season. And it seems like right on cue, things start happening as you get to certain points of the season. Yoenis Cespedes has been a Met, from 2016, 2017, and now 2018. And you're waiting to a certain time before his legs give out. And he has some kind of problem, whether it's with his quad or whether it's with his hip or his leg or his hamstring, and he ends up on the disabled list. Travis d'Arnaud, since the day he came to the major leagues, has been extremely injury prone, and it's just a matter of time before he goes on a disabled list for something. Well, about a month or so ago, he goes on a DL, has Tommy John surgery, and is out for the season. Well, who's the next player that you think of in regards to being so injury prone with the New York Mets? That's Juan Lagares. He goes out there in a game which, by the way, the game played on Wednesday, Mets and Blue Jays, the afternoon game, should by no way, shape, or form have been played. That was a disgrace by Major League Baseball, and an even worse job by the New York Mets, who had the ability to do something about this game before it was played. Now, to simply have the game called and rained out and rescheduled for some other mutual off day that the New York Mets and Toronto Blue Jays have over the course of the rest of the season would have not been as big of a deal as apparently the New York Mets were making this out to be. So this game, once it gets put in the hands of the umpires, once the first pitch is thrown, it's up to the umpires whether or not they can call it. And the umpires, you could tell, had a little bit of an agenda. Their agenda consisted of saying, hey, we're going to do everything we can to make sure this game gets played. Now, I don't know if it's better or benefits the umpires in a certain way to make sure that this game gets played. You know, to not have a mutual off day and have to form a different umpiring crew, maybe a little bit cumbersome to the umpires. May not have been cumbersome to those particular umpires, but to the brethren, to the whole group of them. There's 4 umpires that we're going to have to probably umpire on what was maybe a scheduled off day. I understand how it's a little bit cumbersome, but the fact is you had essentially a torrential downpour throughout that entire game. Certain points of that game where the infield was just unplayable. There's puddles in the infield. You got to stop the game a couple times, and great job by that grounds crew to do all the work that they did, but it just was not necessary. It was just a game that didn't need to be played. So of course, what happens? A Mets player gets hurt. Juan Lagares going back in a deep fly ball in the 9th inning of this game. Goes back, makes a nice catch up against the fence, and looks like he stubs his toe against the wall. But if we followed Juan Lagares over the last several years, we know that an injury is possible with just about anything that happens to him. Similar to Travis d'Arnaud, Juan Lagares is viable to get hurt doing anything. And it's sad, he has a broken toe, he needs surgery on it. It obviously is a significant injury. But this is a guy that can't seem to get out of his own way from an injury perspective. So my broader point about this is the Mets have a series of those type of players. And man, it's scary because you're like, man, I'd like to see this player, whether it's a d'Arnaud or a Lagares or, in a Steven Matz or Zach Wheeler's case, you'd like to see them get through a full season. And if they do, we can finally figure out what type of player they are. Travis d'Arnaud, for the last series of years, has been the Mets starting catcher, and every year he deals with an injury, some of them minor. The injury he dealt with last year didn't keep him out for a long period of time. But once the season's over, you think of the offseason, you're like, hey, this guy has shown in bits and spurts that he can be okay. But he's also shown a series of weaknesses. Hey, if this guy is healthy for a course of a full season, we'll finally get to see what he's about. The next year comes and he gets hurt. This year, he's out for the season. 2019 comes. I don't know how the Mets are going to address their catching situation. Devin Mesoraco was acquired from the Cincinnati Reds. Yeah, he has a chance to stake a claim to the job. Kevin Plawecki, when he comes off the DL, maybe he'll get a chance to play every day. And if he does, you may get to see what he's about. So Travis d'Arnaud is probably not guaranteed the starting catcher job for the New York Mets in 2019, but you get to a certain point and you're like, man, it's like the same old routine with the same old players. And obviously I don't mean old as if these players are ancient, but it's the same players that you're seeing year in and year out being counted on to perform, and the same players end up getting hurt and missing significant periods of time. So I don't know how to react to that, because as a fan you get frustrated because you want to see what all these players could do if they're all on the same field at the same time. Seems like it's okay in spring training. Seems like it's okay once the season gets started from April into May, and they start dropping off one by one by one by one. Now the Mets, yes, they're in a tough spot because they have a series of players on the disabled list right now The St. Louis Cardinals have had 7 players go on the disabled list in the last 10 days. So injuries start running rampant in baseball regardless. It just seems like with the Mets, it always seems to hit them. And really, out after 2015, it seems like every single year they have probably more players than other teams on the disabled list. Now the St. Louis Cardinals are up there with them. There's a lot of other teams in Major League Baseball that have been snake bitten when it comes to injuries. But one of the things that you're supposed to have on a championship caliber team that you're trusting to go out there and make a run for a potential World Series championship, or at the very least getting in there as a wild card and playing postseason baseball, is depth. And the Mets, the one year that they made a run in the postseason and made it to the World Series was a year that they ended up getting themselves a considerable amount of depth. They didn't have it when the season started. Remember John Mayberry batting fourth? That was a regular lineup that was put out there against left-hand pitchers because they didn't have the depth. All of a sudden, they make the trade for Kelly Johnson and Juan Uribe and call up Michael Conforto and make the big trade for Yoenis Cespedes, and all of a sudden Travis d'Arnaud and David Wright come back. You could see the Mets have better ability to deal with little injuries and even major injuries because of the amount of qualified Major League players they had on their roster. Well, if you look at the lineup that's going to come out today as they play the Arizona Diamondbacks, where is that fear? If I'm the Diamondbacks on the other side, am I scared that Phillip Evans may be playing left field? Am I scared about, Brandon Nimmo, and his all-around hustle, probably playing every day now? Am I scared about whoever it is that's going to be playing third base, whether it's Wilmer Flores or Jose Reyes? The problem is that the Mets have not equipped themselves with enough depth. And, last year they had depth up to a certain point, and when the season got out of hand, they ended up making a bunch of deals. But, all you have to do is look at teams that seem to win year upon year. And obviously it fluctuates a little bit because there's teams that rebuild themselves well. Of course, everybody could point to the Houston Astros and to say, hey, they stunk for such a long time, but now they are really good. They have so much depth. But what they do is they continue to add to their depth. They traded for Justin Verlander at the trading deadline last year. But that wasn't enough for them. They went out there and made the deal for Garrett Cole. So not only did they have Verlander and Garrett Cole, they made the investment in Charlie Morton. They brought up Lance McCullers. He's a full-time Major League starter now. Dallas Keuchel's won a Cy Young. They have a considerable amount of depth there. And if they have an injury, God forbid somebody comes out, ends up missing a couple weeks or a month, they could go to a Brad Peacock. They could go to a Colin McHugh. Because those are all solid, probably 4 or 5 starter candidates that are on their roster. You look at a team like the New York Mets, they don't have that same type of depth. And it's almost like certain teams are poised to win that much that they're going to make sure that there's less excuses. And the more depth that you have, the less excuses you have when the injury bug hits you. Because you know it's going to hit you at some point. Especially players now, they don't have the amphetamines. The fact that they can't, rejuvenate themselves day game after a night game. You've seen the impact that Greenies outside of Major League Baseball has had on a good series amount of players. And there's good players that just can't keep themselves in a lineup all the time. There's a handful of players that played in 162 games last year, but should they have? Well, probably not. The average amount of games that are played by a full-time Major League Baseball player has dropped by about 10 games since Major League Baseball banned amphetamines. So there is certainly a very good running trend that has to do with it. Greenies were able to keep players, motivated and feeling good and energized to a point where they can play all the time. Now you need more platoons. You need more depth. And the difference between the teams that are successful now and the teams that are not successful, yes, has something to do with the amount of talent, but also is just as important to the amount of depth that they have on each one of their teams. And the New York Yankees have dealt with a couple injuries, and we wouldn't even have known based off of their performance on a baseball field. They're able to slide players in because they've created and they've accumulated a certain amount of depth. It doesn't seem to happen with other teams. While we're on the topic of baseball, I got to talk about Mark Teixeira and the comments he made regarding Robinson Cano. And it really seems like Mark Teixeira has taken his post-baseball career and has decided that he wants to be a critic for the very game he supported and was a part of and got compensated very well for. Now, Mark Teixeira may never have touched steroids, and if he says that, I'll believe him. It's hard to believe anybody in regards to Major League Baseball because steroids at a certain point in a game were running so rampant that there's no way you could ever tell who was using and who was not using. But Mark Teixeira, claims to be a guy that was clean, claims to be bothered by players that use performance-enhancing drugs. I'll quote a colleague of mine who made a very good point today. He didn't benefit himself whatsoever by making the comments that he made because he simply didn't need to make them. And I don't know if it's the fact that he's working for ESPN and maybe ESPN is kind of saying, hey, you know what, let's push the envelope. Let's see if we could get you to say something that is going to border the line or perhaps cross the line over a period of time. It may be true. ESPN may be an enabler in this situation. But nobody cares about anything that Mark Teixeira has to say. And if Mark Teixeira is going to continue to be making belittling comments towards other people that played the game the same time that he did, he's not doing himself any favors. There's nothing that he's going to be able to accomplish by telling, the people on ESPN and his audience that Robinson Cano being caught for the use of performance-enhancing drugs was not a surprise to him. Now, there is a code that should exist amongst players in a locker room. And if you go back 20, 30, 40 years to those that played baseball that long ago, it would have been considered sacrilegious to say something along the lines of what Mark Teixeira said. There were things that happened in a locker room. The same thing applies to any sort of fraternity that exists amongst coworkers. There's things that happen that you keep amongst yourselves, amongst your own peers. Now, if there's something that's breaking the law, there may be a situation where you should say something. But if it's not breaking the law, there are certain things that you should respect. The fact that you're amongst peers and amongst people and just not say certain things. So Mark Teixeira is not making a name for himself by saying the things that he's saying. He's kind of making himself look a little bit foolish. Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Feel free to comment if you want on a Facebook Live or Periscope feed, anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. Unfortunately, I don't have any comments on Periscope that are in English right now, and that's the only language that I know and I'm able to recite. So maybe I'll look up a couple of the things. If they were comments, maybe they're positive and negative. Of course, any trolls will just, I just don't have time for them. If you want to troll funny. That's the only thing that I would say. If you want to crack a joke in a trolling sense, I can laugh with you. But I did want to talk a little bit about the, Draymond Green's mom. And I'll tell you, I'll preface what I'm saying is that the last thing that I need any advice in relation to basketball or the playoffs or any sort of feedback in regards to why the game didn't go a certain way or what could have happened, the last person I want to hear is from a professional basketball player's mom. And I don't know how her comments impact the Golden State Warriors locker room, how Kevin Durant reacts to him. Does that impact his relationship with Draymond Green? The bottom line is that the Golden State Warriors, in a game in which the Houston Rockets absolutely needed, if they wanted to have a chance to win that series, the Rockets showed up and the Warriors didn't. And I don't know what that means for the rest of the series. I think most of us feel like it's a series that the Golden State Warriors are going to win, even though the Houston Rockets have the home court advantage. I do fear if the series somehow goes to 7 games, I think the home court advantage could very well benefit the Houston Rockets. I think the Warriors can close it out in 5 or 6 games because I just think they have so much of a superior team. Now the Rockets showed something in Game 2. They went out there and they played as if there was a sense of urgency. They played as if they needed that game. And they went out and they made a statement. They would have made it a very good statement. And the fact that the Warriors, coming off of a road-winning Game 1, may not have necessarily been clicking on all cylinders. They may not have been exactly 100% motivated. They may have been going through the motions, and the Houston Rockets took advantage of it. That's what happens in basketball. That's what happens when you get to the conference finals. You're playing a pretty good team. Nobody's going to dispute the fact that the Houston Rockets are a pretty good basketball team. The one concern that I've had, and I'll continue to say this until it's somehow proven the other way, James Harden has never come through in a big game. Chris Paul has never come through in a big game. And Mike D'Antoni has never come through as a coach in a big game. So until that happens, I'm going to lean towards believing that the Golden State Warriors are going to prevail in this series and prevail pretty easily. Now, the Houston Rockets took a good first step by winning one of their first 2 home games. I don't think anybody expected that they were going to win both of them. But the fact that they won one as they get set to go to California and play Game 3 puts them in a pretty good position. The Warriors are going to be extremely favored in Game 3. Probably be extremely favored in Game 4. If the Houston Rockets want to get me to a point where I'm going to slant my eye a little bit and say, win one of these next 2 games. Go back home in Game 5 with the series tied 2-2. I mean, you want to shock me? Win both of them. I don't think that's going to happen. But you want to get me to think, maybe? Win one of these next 2 games in California. But as far as Draymond Green's mom, I don't know why anybody makes such a big deal about it. Why are the media reporters going to Draymond Green's mom after the game? You know, Warriors just lost a tough game. I want to get maybe a soundbite from Green, maybe a soundbite from Steph Curry, maybe a soundbite from Durant or the coach. Who is going over to Draymond Green's mom saying, hey, what did you think of the performance in that game? That person needs to get a life. Last thing I want to touch on, and we've kind of moved around a little bit. We talked some baseball. We talked some basketball. We talked about, obviously, gambling and the stuff going on with the state of New Jersey and, obviously, many other states that are going to have legalized sports betting very soon. And, obviously, prayers go out to the victims in a mass shooting over in Texas. And my continued statement, and I'll continue to say this until the day I'm in the ground, be cognizant of those around you, not just in a fearful way, but in a way that you can impact them in a positive way. Be positive. Surround yourself around positive people, but also try to make an impact on those that may not be so positive. Because we may have a chance to impact their life in a way that could, be good for their health and also be good for the health of those around them. Maybe keep them from being that next mass shooter. The last thing I wanted to touch on, the NFL, you have the Arizona Cardinals practicing, and Josh Rosen's looking pretty good. And all of a sudden, you find out that Mike Glennon's getting sick. And obviously, I'm going to make this into a little bit of a joke. Mike Glennon has not had a good couple years. He signed a long-term deal with the Chicago Bears to be their starting quarterback. And then he watches the draft, and all of a sudden the Bears trade up to number 2 and draft Mitchell Trubisky out of North Carolina. Mitchell Trubisky obviously was drafted to be the quarterback of the Chicago Bears' future. So Mike Glennon, halfway through the season, is no longer the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears. Gets released, gets signed by the Arizona Cardinals. Now, gets signed around the same time that Sam Bradford signed with the Cardinals. So it was good for both of them. They both have the opportunity that if Bradford is healthy, and obviously anytime you sign Bradford, you want to sign another quarterback, because Sam Bradford has shown over the history of the last several seasons that he cannot stay healthy for a full length of an NFL football season. So Mike Glennon's there. He thinks he's going to compete with Sam Bradford. Says, hey, at the very least, there's a chance that Bradford might not be healthy. So I get a chance to win the job outright. And even if Sam Bradford is healthy, I get a chance to compete in training camp for the starting quarterback job of the Arizona Cardinals. Now the draft comes. You see the 3 quarterbacks come off the board. Sam Darnold, drafted by the Jets at number 3. Of course, Baker Mayfield goes number 1 to the Browns. Then the Buffalo Bills trade up to number 7 and take Josh Allen out of Wisconsin. And the Arizona Cardinals are scheduled to pick, 15th? And all of a sudden you hear it's a trade. The Arizona Cardinals are trading up for the number 10 pick. There's no other reason that they're going to trade up to get the number 10 pick if they're not going to take a quarterback. So Mike Glennon is like, oh my God, they're taking Josh Rosen. Josh Rosen out of UCLA is obviously drafted to be the quarterback of the future. They're in training camp. Josh Rosen's looking good. I don't think there's any coincidence that Mike Glennon is knelt down throwing up. And he was vomiting. It could have been a coincidence. He could have just gotten sick. But he just might have gotten sick when he's thinking about the unfortunate series of events that have involved his football playing career over the last couple of years. He's a guy that sat behind Jameis Winston in Tampa Bay. Ends up being respected very well as a guy that could start for a couple teams, gets the deal with the Chicago Bears. Mitchell Trubisky's there now. He goes over to the Arizona Cardinals. Hey, I might get a chance to play there. It looks like I got a good shot. Josh Rosen's there. So you've seen over the last couple of years some things not go right for Mike Glennon. And I got to be honest, if he's vomiting and throwing up over it and getting sick over it, I understand. It makes perfect sense. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you. Feel free if you want. Maybe a comment or two if you want over the last couple of minutes of the show today. Of course, we'll be back with you Monday around 6 to 7 p.m. Big weekend, of course. You got the Belmont Stakes. And obviously, everybody's going to root for the horse that won the Kentucky Derby. And if we have a multiple winner, the upcoming Belmont Stakes. I'm sorry, I got them confused. Preakness coming up this weekend. So the Preakness, obviously, if the same horse wins both of those races, you got the Triple Crown and the Belmont Stakes coming up in a couple weeks. You obviously got playoff basketball. I'm interested to see, can the Houston Rockets win a game here? Can they win Game 3 or win Game 4? In Golden State, in California. Be interesting to see how that works out. You got the very enticing and interesting series going on in the NHL between the Winnipeg Jets and the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, the National Hockey fan may say, hey, there's no Boston, there's no Pittsburgh, there's no New York, there's no Los Angeles, there's no Chicago. From a rating standpoint, it can't possibly be that good. I'm looking at two incredible stories that are playing in this series. And I wish, and nothing against the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Washington Capitals. I've made my case of why it's very good for the Capitals to finally get past the Pittsburgh Penguins and maybe have a chance to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. But I'm really hoping that the winner of the Jets Golden Knights series wins the Stanley Cup. Now, you may not like that. Like I said, if you're a diehard, old school, traditional hockey fan, it might bother you that a team could be assembled in one year and win the Stanley Cup that first year. I believe if we see it happen this year, it may be something that we'll never see again in the history of professional sports. And being a sports fan, being a man who loves to talk about sports, I tell you, that is something that really gets me going. I'm really intrigued about the possibility of that happening. So, no disrespect meant to the Winnipeg Jets, who have been in the NHL for a long time. I spoke about it on the show the other day. It'd be nice to see them win a Stanley Cup for the first time. A team and a city that lost its hockey team for a little while when it went to Phoenix, became the Coyotes. Benefited when the Atlanta Thrashers ended up moving. They moved to Winnipeg, and that is the Atlanta Thrashers franchise. But the bottom line is, since 1973, the Winnipeg Jets have been kind of a second division team in the National Hockey League. So there would be some intrigue in there. Can they win their first Stanley Cup? Can the Capitals finally get one, get over the hump? And what about the Tampa Bay Lightning? They've won cups before. They're the team that probably has the most proven track record in the hockey playoffs. Probably the team that, if we're going to put a wager on, you'd say they have the best odds, even though the last time I checked, it looks like the Washington Capitals are favored to win the Stanley Cup at this point. But a lot of good things going on this weekend. You got, local baseball from the Mets standpoint. And I hope they just stop losing players. I mean, they look like a minor league baseball team right now because, like I said before, there's absolutely no depth. And depth has killed them. Depth has destroyed them, and it's probably destroyed their season before it started. Because you knew if they hit a series of injuries, they weren't going to be in a position to compete. They weren't going to be in a position to stay up with the other teams if they were missing 2-3 players out of their lineup, if they were potentially missing 2 or 3 of their big pitchers. Obviously, if they want to get things going right, they need to get the best out of Jacob deGrom, the best out of Noah Syndergaard, and they got to start winning some games. They got to find a way to score some runs. Somebody in that lineup has to step up, whether it's a Jay Bruce or a Michael Conforto, and dare I say, even Adrian Gonzalez. I know he's got a slider speed bat at this stage of his career, but maybe he could go on a little run. Todd Frazier's supposed to be back. Maybe he could swing the bat a little bit. But I tell you, the one thing that has concerned me the most about the Mets is the fact that they don't have enough depth, and their starting pitchers are not going very deep into ball games. And the one thing that we hear, if you're listening to local sports talk, even national sports talk, they're getting to the point where they say, hey, what are the Mets going to do with the trading deadline? Should they start dumping players? What can you get for Syndergaard? What can you get for Jacob deGrom? And here's my message to the New York Mets as we get ready to end the show today. If you as an organization, whether it's ownership, whether it's the front office, whether it's the coaching staff, the manager, the players, or the fans, if you're just a simple New York Mets fan that is disgusted by hearing the possibility of the Mets trading Jacob deGrom and Noah Syndergaard, you know what the Mets can do to change that? They can start winning some freaking ball games. Find some way to come out with more runs than the opposition tonight. Try to do the same thing tomorrow. Win more games than you lose. Get to a point where you're a series of games over 500. I'm not expecting them to be 10 or 20 or 50 games over 500, but maybe they can just get to a point where they're trending in the right direction, playing better baseball, winning more often than they're losing. Win a couple series. And you know what? You start doing that, and these New York talk shows and newspapers that can't wait to write about what team would look best or what uniform would look best on Noah Syndergaard and Jacob deGrom. You know what you can do about it, the New York Mets? Start winning some friggin' ball games. Stop making excuses. It's not about the players that aren't on the field. It's about the players that are on the field. Win a couple games, and all that stuff will go away, and it won't be stories here in New York. We'll be back with you tomorrow. I hope everybody has a nice weekend. We'll be back with you probably 6 o'clock Eastern. And probably aiming to do a show maybe early Tuesday, maybe 7 or 8 a.m. Because I really enjoyed doing the show early yesterday. And I do want to reach out and, interact with the audience that was around listening around that time. So I hope everybody has a good weekend. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.